Hello and welcome back. This is Catherine Urban, and I'm here with my guest, Mo Olufemi. Welcome back, Mo. We're going to be talking about the presidential election here in the United States. This is our third rendition of this little spontaneous series that we decided to do. And we're gonna get to the end of it here. We're gonna offer our final prediction here today. So, how are you doing today, Mo?
I'm doing well, enjoying the long weekend, and I guess the last peaceful moment in terms of the astrology that we'll experience maybe for a while, because after Thursday, I think, when Mars moves into Cancer, we're starting to like set certain things in motion. So just enjoying the calm before the storm.
Before the big storm. Yeah. So, tell us just a little bit about yourself and what brought you to this work.
Yeah, so for those who haven't been watching the series and are just tuning in for the finale, more of a traditional astrologer. So I did get into astrology again, I want to say right as Saturn was going into Capricorn at the end of 2017. So that was a while ago. Um, I was first like a modern person, like, oh, astrology is not just reading a horoscope. You can do predictions with this stuff. Okay, what are the techniques? Progressions was probably the gateway drug for me. And then I found the astrology podcast and then got really pulled into more of the traditional astrology and gaining an appreciation for how old astrology is and all the things that you can do with it. So that's kind of what informs the basis of the work we're doing and have been doing for the past, like couple of months now.
Yes, totally. Yes. And similar story for me too. So I know some of you are finding this channel for the first time. I'm Catherine Urban. I'm also an astrologer. I've also been practicing for a long time. I'm also a traditional and getting much more into medieval techniques, although I also started out in modern. And so today you're going to get to see a sample platter of top shelf astrological predictive techniques. Um, Similar to you, Mo, like I don't know, like I just have continuously been learning. It feels like every year I'm studying with a new teacher, constantly trying to get my hands on new techniques and just trying to elevate my craft, but also I'm just like personally just fascinated with astrology. So never ends.
Yeah, I find that like the best astrologers are the ones who never stop learning. So I think after this, I'm probably going to dive back into the Vedic stuff. So it's been
Get
great,
it.
like going deep with some of these medieval techniques. I even just ordered a book on Ferdaria just because I wanted more of an in-depth guide in terms of like how to use it. Because I know that's another way of breaking up large swaths of time and just showing people like sort of the quality of what they're going to experience for maybe decades at a time. So maybe I'll do more with that. Stay tuned.
Yes, we will. I can't wait to see what you do. You're already an amazing astrologer, which is why we're here. So let's get into the astrology. We're talking about again, presidential election, United States 2024. There's been a lot of curveballs leading up to this point. We're recording here on September 2nd, 2024. And we've laid a lot of groundwork. Like when we first connected in our first video, so you all can go back and watch. It was just after the first presidential debate where tremendous doubt was cast on Biden, and we actually predicted the range that he would drop out and endorse Harris. So we did that there. And we also, in our first video, we also explored Trump in depth with his solar return. In our second video, we looked at the chart of JD Vance, and we also spent some time with Trump and Harris. We brought in Harris's solar return for 2023 and brought us up to speed till right now. So Kamala Harris is going to get a new solar return in October. So we're going to look at that. We've looked at it briefly before, but we're going to look at that again. And we're going to give you our official prediction here for the election and its aftermath, because it's the aftermath too that we have to look at. It's the aftermath that gets a little crazy. So we're going to break it all down. But before we do, um, we wanna offer you a little teaser. So, Mo, what is your prediction? What do you think is gonna happen?
Yeah, so with everything I've seen in the last 3 weeks, I'm going to trickle down on my prediction that I made on Twitter back in May of Kamala being our wartime president. Like, I think that she will win. I don't think it's going to be the landslide that some of the people who are coconut pilled, if you want to call it that, think it's going to be. But I think it's going to be contentious, fought out in the margins, and I wouldn't be surprised if there are legal challenges to the election results. And if we get another one of those situations where maybe there is a delay in terms of the count, and I would watch what happens on the ballots in especially the battleground states. I mean, they're already talking about how RFK is upset and trying to sue certain states like Pennsylvania, for example, because they won't take his name off the ballot. To be fair, he did not take his name off before the deadline, which was recently. So just watch out for that kind of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with you. And I think you actually put out a prediction as early as January, even talking about a second insurrection. And yeah, let's pat yourself on the back for that one. Because now headlines are starting to suggest the same thing.
Yeah, and you know what's even more uncanny is if you look at the anniversary of, I think it's what, the fourth anniversary of January 6th, Mars retrogrades back into Cancer. That feels very loud to me. So we'll see. We'll see.
Yes. Yeah. Um, as far as my little teaser prediction goes, I saw your prediction about the second insurrection, and it confirmed what I was already kind of feeling back then. Because I started to deep dive into all this like back, as I did my year ahead forecast back in like December. And I was kind of sensing the same thing from that Mars retrograde alone. And the more I've gotten into the more intricate layers of prediction, the more I see it. And especially with Kamala Harris being the front runner, well, the Democratic ticket, um, I see it through her chart as well. So that seems like a definite to me. And as we get closer to the election, we're starting to see various newspapers drop hints about this. We're also starting to see them talk about how people are going to just refuse to certify election results and how that's going to create delays. So, I mean, the astrology is saying it and the non astrologers are saying it. So, I think there's a pretty strong chance of a second insurrection, which would or an event similar. So that would imply that perhaps Harris would win alone. And I see that in a lot of my predictive techniques too, although I don't see Trump going anywhere. In fact, I see a rise for both of them. So it really comes down to the nuanced details of where each person is going to rise and in which context, because I definitely see it for both people.
Yeah, and another thing that I hope we clarify once we look at the monthly charts and everything coming up is whenever I was making my assertion that Kamala would be the person, I never saw it as one of those, oh my God, everything is great. And it's like Obama presidency, first term 2.0. No, I see this as, again, women getting shoved into positions of power to get set up to be the fall guy type stuff. And so that's something that obviously we'd have to look at, the next few decades for her. But I do want to point out that for her zodiacal releasing, as Lisa Scheim has been pointing out since 2018, essentially. She's in this 12-year peak period that started, in 2020, and that doesn't end till 2032. So there's a lot going on, and I think she's actually in an L2 peak right now
Yeah,
until the beginning of 2025. And so that's just really fascinating to me. And I wonder what that's going to map onto in terms of the things that she's dealing with, right?
totally. Yeah, and her peak periods are overtly positive there because she has
Hmm.
the influence of the benefics. And
Yes.
it was interesting to note that she was in a peak period on all four levels when she nominated Walls and as her nominee. And at the DNC too, she was peaking on all four levels. So that's an indication of what's to come as well. She continues to peak on 3 out of 4 when it comes to election and inauguration. So yeah, that's interesting to note. But Trump too. I mean, he's coming into a peak period in April of 2025, and that's like a peak on level 1, and that period contains his Mars. So that should bring some level of difficulty, but also it indicates that some of the things that he becomes known for, like that is going to be a period that will define him more than some of the other things that we've seen, which is crazy to say considering the name he's already made for himself in so many ways.
Yeah, no, as someone who has the malefic out of sect angular for those peak periods myself, I do want to say that they don't necessarily always correspond to reversals necessarily. Then again, mine is Saturn and not Mars. Mars is a little more sever happy than Saturn is. But it can connote like needing to overcome certain obstacles and fighting certain challenges. So I do think that there will be backlash to whatever the result is. I don't think it's going to be a favorable outcome for Trump personally. Um, and yeah, I just want to put that out there that we're heading into some interesting times, to put it mildly, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Hmm.
So let's see here. Um, where do you want to begin? I want to pull up some charts. Where do we want to begin?
I kind of want to look at, I know we said let's look at the Libra ingress, but then I realized the inauguration would fit under the Capricorn ingress, and it might be worth looking at both charts briefly.
Ooh, okay. Okay. Let's see here. Let me just Okay. So here is our Capricorn ingress chart, and we're going to take a peek at this. We did look at the Aries ingress, I think, in our first video. So that one is like the most important one, because it has like a fixed rising, but we can still look at this one to also give us an idea of what's coming up in the next quarter. So this is the
Oh, wait a
Capricorn.
second. I have a different rising for this one.
Hmm.
Am I like missing something? Hold on.
No, actually, shoot. Um, you know
Are
what?
these the 12?
All right. So, little technical Mercury stationing error, although the Mercury, yeah, Mercury is stationing right now still. So, okay. Anyways, this is the correct chart, the Capricorn ingress chart. So, I'm looking at this for the first time. So, Mo, if you wanna start.
Yeah, so I looked at this, and if any of you have been paying attention to any of the different ingress charts for each solstice or equinox, you'll notice that all of them have Mars in a whole sign angle, right? And it's both the Libra and the Capricorn ingress that actually have Mars in the 10th, right? Which is huge to me, and that suggests there's some kind of conflict or issue that's front and center, especially maybe some upset with respect to leadership or authority. Granted, Mars is also retrograde here. This is Mars, I think a week and a half, give or take, maybe even 2 weeks off of its station.
Hmm.
So Mars is moving backwards, right? And Mars retrograde can be a very frustrating period because Mars typically likes to move forward with things. And when you're moving backwards, you're not necessarily making progress, right? This is also still a Mars that's kind of slow. It hasn't quite picked up speed while it's moving, retrograde, right? So this feels like a long, drawn out conflict with Mars in a fixed sign. It's also giving war of attrition vibes. It's also the ruler of that ascendant right there. So this gives me the impression that there will be some contention over who's really at the helm, right?
Hmm.
Um, I don't like that the moon is like the moon, which represents the people, is directly opposite Saturn in this chart as well. It just feels like a very, very austere time, right? I think it's interesting that, Saturn represents the opposition, right? If we think about the incumbent versus the opposition in some respects. And it just feels like there's some misalignment there between what the people are interested in and what the opposition might be interested in. I don't like that we've also got Mercury and Jupiter not doing constructive things right now. It does feel like a time of, lots of misinformation, disinformation, um, and just contention, right? And Mercury's
Yeah.
also just coming off of being retrograde itself, right? After this period. So probably
Yes.
clearing out from some confusion. Love Mercury and Sagittarius, but boy, does it love to be loud and wrong sometimes.
Especially opposite Jupiter. Yeah. Hmm.
Who's also committed to bending the truth and Gemini.
Yes. And well, this is happening in Harris's seventh house of opponents. And Mercury is her time lord at the time. So, like you said, bending of truths, bending the law, that kind of thing would really apply here. Um, the other thing that is standing out to me too is the fact that the moon in this harsh opposition with Saturn rules the ninth house of courts. So there's definitely some sort of involvement there. And I would say concern of the people with the outcome of the courts. And we know through the Aries ingress chart
Hmm.
that courts are a really big theme this year, and they certainly have been. There's been a lot of concern with the legitimacy of the courts or like how much we can trust them.
Hmm.
So that's interesting because a contested election would hinge upon the outcome of a judgment of the Supreme Court. So that is interesting.
Yeah, and I love that that 12th part of the ascendant is also in the ninth house, right? So
Mm,
concerned with the courts, concerns with legality, things like that. Giving constitutional crisis a little bit, just saying.
yeah.
Yeah.
Also, Uranus conjunct an angle, that doesn't bode well for things that are predictable or stable. That brings definitely an element and an influence of erratic and unpredictable outcomes. So yeah, but it looks like with Mars retrograde, this might be a really good time to talk about Mars retrograde just generally. And then we can talk about how it's going to show up for each candidate. But, you've got Mars stationing retrograde. This is going to be a huge signature that we're going to all be dealing with. Um, it starts with Mars entering, well, Leo right around the election day itself and opposing Pluto just a couple days before. And Mars Pluto signatures are volatile, they're ruthless, it's combative and destructive. And there's a lot of rage, there's a lot of built up rage and a willingness to do anything to defend the sacred, because this is going to be happening with Mars actually in Cancer there for a minute. And then Mars enters Leo. And yeah, so then Mars is going to station retrograde in early December, December 6th. And here's the thing, folks, is that we've got a Mars retrograde spanning from December, January, and February. And then immediately after that, we're going to have a Venus retrograde going from March halfway through April. So this is just screaming pause. Like everything's on pause. The things that you think you're going to be doing, even just personally at the beginning of the year, everything's going to be on pause. So the way that I would envision this showing up, like on the world stage, especially for people who are a part members of a nation, you know, a lot of stress, external stress could be experienced by such a thing as an election delay and what's going to happen. And many people may experience an event like that personally, is what I'm saying. Um, but Mars retrogrades are a time of reassessing, and they can be times that extinguish a plan where you have to kind of pivot and reassess what to do given the shifting and the changing of the terrain. Your expectations may shift, your desires may shift. Mars retrogrades are times of contemplating what lights you up, what you're passionate about. And this is going to be happening in Trump's first house. So this is very personal to him. It's then going to retrograde back into Cancer over his Time Lord, which is Saturn. He has Saturn in Cancer. And it's going to be personal to Harris too, because as it retrogrades back into Cancer, it's going to square her luminaries. And it squares her Mercury at the beginning, which is her Time Lord. So
Mm-hmm.
this Mars retrograde, I think everything is kind of hinging on this in a way. Um, and to just take it a step further, Mars retrograde in Cancer, Cancer is a sign that clings. Cancer is a sign that clenches their fists and doesn't want to let go. And with Pluto there, it's like, you know, someone who feels like if I lose this, I lose everything. And it's kind of an extreme signature. And I could see how that could show up for people who are loyalists on either side. Like if the person that you don't want to win um, wins, then you're going to feel like you're clinging to something in such an extreme way. But I just feel like with it happening in Trump's first house, it makes it a little bit, and over his Time Lord, I don't know. I just feel like it's going to
Yeah.
be a little bit more like second insurrection vibes.
Yeah, like I don't know. I've been thinking a lot about that dignity change between Cancer and Leo, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
remember what I said in the last video that Mars in Cancer is hypervigilant, is a great word for Cancer, Mars. Hypervigilant towards perceived threat, feeling like someone is going to take everything from you, so now I have to overreact and freak out at everybody, right? I know everybody likes to think that, oh, it's Mars in fire signs or Mars in domicile and exaltation that's angry. No, that is a very controlled experience of Mars. I would argue that Mars, when it's, debilitated either by exile or fall, it's actually a less constructive way of handling, anger. Anger is usually like an emotion that drives you to improve and do better and, accomplish things. Whereas, Mars and Cancer, it's not that you can't accomplish things. It's just that sometimes, you are your own downfall because you're constantly pushing against things because, you're perceiving slights. Not that there aren't slights for sure. It's just that you may be entering situations where I don't know, like where you should tread lightly, but then you don't, right?
Yeah.
Um, I also find it fascinating with this Mars retrograde as it relates to Trump. It's kind of similar to the one in 2020 where it was Mars in Aries, right?
Aries. Mm-hmm.
Squaring all of that stuff, right? And that didn't bode well for him, retaking the helm, right? And what happened at the end of that once Mars, I know everybody hates the shadow concept, LOL. But like in that case, it was quite useful because it was Mars making yet another aspect to Trump's then Time Lord, which was Venus, right? Once
Hmm.
Mars was done with that, and it was clear that he was denied access to the presidency, right? Um, I found it fascinating that in that Mars dignity change from Aries to Taurus was like, oh, the actual act of insurrecting. And then once Mars went into Taurus, it got shut down, right? Um, I feel like we're gonna have like a weird inverse of that kind of experience, with Mars going over his Venus and Mars going back into Cancer on the anniversary of January 6th, right? It's that Mars that's like overpowered. I wouldn't say overpowered, but like feeling more powerful and then getting humbled really quickly, right? Doesn't bode well for him retaking the helm either. I know Mars is not his annual lord per se, but is applying to his annual lord, right? But also happening to cross his 10th house lord, right? Again, doesn't bode well for taking the helm personally.
Yeah, because it's a retrograde. It's like I have to rethink, I have to pivot, I have to redo. And to your point about the energy shift from Leo to Cancer, I would argue that Mars in Leo has a lot of passion and it's very focused, even when retrograde. But Cancer is very instinctual and reactive, and it's not as strategic. And it's easier to mess up. It's easier to make a mistake based on feeling pressure, feeling overwhelmed. And let's face it, Trump has been dealing with a lot of personal issues this year with all of his different lawsuits. And I mean, there's more. Like, since the last time we connected, there's like several different people suing him for using music. And then, um, yeah, like they're
Someone
reviving.
reopened, yeah, they revived a case. Before that alleged unspoken timeline of when it's too late. They did it 10 days before. We're 60 days out, right? And so that's going to be a problem, I think.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah. So he continues to face even more um, pressure just in his personal life. And I think as many people are suggesting that he feels like he has no choice to win, but he's run down. He's really run down right now. I mean, you can see it. So I think a lot of times too, Mars retrograde is exhaustion. Mars
Yeah.
retrograde says it's time to rest. And one way that I always like to imagine Mars retrograde, because it's Mars opposes it's like Mars halfway through its cycle, the retrograde, and it's halftime. Like an athlete takes a rest and re-strategizes during halftime. A lot of times Mars retrogrades force you to sit down. like like you don't know what to do next. Like you're out of place, you have to sit down and like figure it out. So I think happening in his first house, it's going to be an exhausting moment for him.
Yeah, and I do want to say don't rule out the possibility of, health challenge as well for Trump, right? He's
Totally.
older. Mars is inflammatory. I mean, I've also like flagged this for King Charles, who's also a Leo rising, but he's an early Leo rising. And I said that whole sequence does not look well for his health and well-being, considering what's actually going on with him, right?
Yeah.
This does look like hitting that wall, right? And trying to force through it. But I think between Mars going retrograde in a fixed sign, which really slows things down, I would say,
Yeah. Right.
and going back into Cancer, which is a little more moving through the fog a little bit. Not that Cancer is a slow sign, but the moon is too fluctuating to like allow Mars to move in a meaningful direction for very long. So it just feels like getting burnt out very quickly, right?
Totally. And the 12th house too can be like private ailments, but also like plotting a revenge of some kind, like plotting like a secret movement of some kind, especially like against a female adversary potentially with Venus. Um, but for Harris, the Mars retrograde, I mean, I also just want to point out it's both of their Mars returns here. And so Mars enters Leo and is like, it's a Mars return. And then it backs off. And I had that happen to me personally one time, and I've never felt more exhausted in my life. So, like, thinking about Harris too, being thrust into this role kind of unexpectedly. I mean, I would argue that she may have anticipated Biden's health, making way for a moment for her to step in. I think she was ready to step in, but you're never quite ready for something like that. And I think that that speaks to her experience of Saturn in the 10th house. But, she's giving it her all right now. And the wind is in her sails right now with Mars having moved through Gemini. But this could be a moment of exhaustion too, of just like feeling like I'm almost to it's like you're getting to the finish line and then you're told that you have to run 10 more laps, you know? So,
Yeah, and for Kamala, I know everybody's like, yay, like we've got 2008 vibes all over again, but given that Mars does say things about alliances in her chart, right? I could see like the alliance fizzling out once Mars goes into Cancer, especially because the big elephant in the room for the Democrats is the conflict in Israel and Palestine. And the longer they go on speaking out of both sides of their mouth, they're not just pissing off like the people who are pro-Palestine, they're also pissing off people who are pro-Israel, right? Because whatever they're doing is not enough for either arm of the party, right? And
mhm.
so I feel like for those of you who've kept up with Dr. Lomi's annual almanacs that he releases every year, he did mention that with the movement of Mars into Cancer, there tends to be more correlations with bloodshed in that region of the world, right? So if this whole like rah rah about getting a deal, I don't think it's going to happen, unfortunately. Would love to see it happen, but I think that ship has kind of sailed, right? And unfortunately, I think that there's some kind of escalation that's very possible in
Agreed.
when Mars goes into Cancer later this week, and we're going to see whatever that is. Not saying it's going to be this week, but sometime during that transit, right?
Yeah.
And I think that it could do real damage to their campaign, right? Still think she's going
Yes.
to win, but I do think it's going to alienate large swaths of the party that could have made this a comfortable win versus a marginal win, right?
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I think it's going to be close. And, you know, we're going to get into the nitty gritty here in a minute, but I've been researching a lot about Neptune and Aries. And that ingress, that first ingress occurs at the end of March. So shortly after, well, Venus is still retrograde at that time,
Mhm.
um, which is happening in Aries and Pisces. There's a lot happening in Pisces this year, folks. So we'll talk about that. Um, a lot happening in Pisces. So that story is still going on at that time, but Neptune enters Aries. There's a lot of civil disputes historically that happen with Neptune in Aries and questions around alliances. And I'm going to be producing like a whole webinar that goes into all that stuff here soon. But for our purposes here, it's the return of the Civil War. And I don't think we're going to have like a whole like north south divide. Like it's not going to be quite that simple. Um, However, it's interesting to note that historically, the South was nervous that Abraham Lincoln would win, and they threatened to secede if he won. And they seceded after he won. So before inauguration, before he was inaugurated. So they seceded at the very end of Neptune and Pisces. And then the Civil War began within 24 hours of Neptune's ingress into Aries. Um, so it's interesting to look at that because we could see a potential divide, even like you could say a divide along the party lines of Democrat and Republican, but there's also divides within the parties. There's Trump Republicans, and then there's more like centrist Republicans, we'll call them. And then there's divide within the Democratic Party, even like they like to your point around talking out of both sides of their mouths around a major issue. So yeah, there's definitely civil divide indicated by that. Now, here's what's interesting though, is that should we have a contested election, should we have candidates who both indicate that they're rising in power, that makes me nervous a little bit. Um, so we'll get more into the details of their monthly forecast. And I think that that will kind of clarify some more things, provide some structure to what we're looking at. So should we look at Trump's chart first?
I do want to look at the the Libra
Okay,
ingress
let's
real
do that.
quick because
Let's
that'll
do
take
that.
us into where we're heading, and then we can jump into Trump's chart.
Awesome. All right, let's do that. All right. This is the correct one.
Okay, yeah. So the Libra ingress. So this is the energy that we're going into election season with. We're actually what, 20 days out from this? Yeah. But we have eclipses before that, and it'll be interesting to talk about the eclipses in the context of each candidate, right?
Yeah.
Um, I don't really like this chart. I mean, I like this chart because, the ascendant ruler is Venus, who's pretty happy, but like, do note that Venus is about to have a massive dignity change, which kind of feeds into that unsettling vibe of everything was great until it wasn't, right?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah. And 29 degrees, that's a critical degree. And she's also square Pluto. So, yeah, I mean, there are definitely tensions there. And the signature of Venus is really strong there. Like, there's a crisis associated with 29 degrees. And so, a crisis around what's fair, a question around justice, um, a question around the law. Like, Venus is trying to keep things fair and just, but when not everyone is playing by the agreed upon rules, um, it can get like there's a tremendous feelings of like Pluto, like um feeling violated even.
You
Like trust is
know,
violated.
I wonder if this also looks like some kind of like last minute, last ditch effort to you know, form some kind of like allegiance or connection. Uh which may or may not influence how the results of the election go. This looks like a tenuous last minute alliance that's put together to overcome some hurdle. And then whenever Venus's movement into Scorpio comes together, maybe like that kind of falls apart a little bit, right?
Mhm. Yeah, and looking at the 10th house is going to tell us about the party that's in power. And it's interesting because it's ruled by the moon. So the moon's pretty happy here. The moon is making a trine with the sun, which also represents the leader. So it looks like the people are kind of behind whoever's in power right now, which would be like the Democrats, basically. But you do have this Mars here that's fallen, and that definitely plays into things. And this is something that you especially talked about a lot the last time. I'm definitely seeing it too, that things are sunny right now, especially for Democrats, but there's trouble coming. And I think that this Mars tells us about that.
Yeah, I don't like that Mars rules the seventh house, which says things about other nations, right?
Oh my God.
This does look like another volatile nation having a bone to pick with us. And, you know, um, I know everybody is like kind of, I wouldn't say everyone's forgotten about everything going on with Russia and Ukraine, but I wouldn't sleep on the potential for that to escalate either. They're already having disputes about Ukraine getting permission from NATO to strike Russia directly. Um, It just looks like an escalation, especially out of some kind of perceived threat. This also does look like maybe striking preemptively. I'd say like Cancer Mars is a little reactive, and I would argue that all the cardinal Marses tend to like plan, like they do things first as opposed to like waiting for someone to strike back.
Hmm.
And that doesn't look really good for the things that the leaders have to deal with, right?
Hmm.
Um, I'm wondering if like being thrust further into conflict also bodes badly for the leader because it's like, why are you dragging us into this conflict that we are not privy to the information about, right?
Yeah.
So,
Well, it's interesting because Mars in Cancer, like what you're describing, brings something to mind for me. Like it's kind of like how you used to do it in elementary school, where you'd like tap someone on the back and then just like be all unassuming, like I didn't do that. But we're doing that kind of on a grand global level where it's like there's initiating and funding of other conflicts, but we're like, it's not us, it's not us. So it's like a situation like that. Like we didn't do it. We just
yeah,
we just put the weapons there for them to take. Like
yeah, it's
it's
big
kind of like that.
throw rocks and hide your hands energy. And, you know, someone snaps and like maybe overreacts to a subtle provocation with like an over response that makes it not enjoyable for everybody, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Well, it's interesting what you're saying too about there maybe being like a brief alliance. Because if there were to be, and again, this is like a chart that covers the next 3 months. Like this will take us to the Capricorn ingress. But it's interesting to note that we see the Mars in the 10th is in a trine with Saturn, which rules the fourth. So, like, let's say that there was a reason for parties to come together to make a decision on a global level, um, that it would be supportive of that. Because at this point, I don't see our political parties in the United States agreeing on much else. Like, there's, it's really difficult for them to come to an agreement on anything right now. So,
mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. And I am a little bit concerned about the fourth house ruler being in the sixth. That doesn't bode well for anything that has to do with maybe the health of like, I don't know, like animals, livestock, people, just because I know that we are going into the fall, illnesses run rampant, monkeypox is back, H5N1 is doing all this other stuff.
COVID too.
Yep. So I would just watch for that kind of thing as well. And I don't like that the malefics are, kikiing a bit, like, okay, let's make everybody sick and miserable.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Cool. We're doing it.
Oh, but you bring up health too. And, um, Saturn is going to represent the party that isn't holding power. So this would be Republicans. And yeah, I mean, just being in a cadent house, not really finding a whole lot of support from other planets. Um, it's not really doing too well. And you brought up health. And I know we've talked about this explicitly before, but Trump's solar return does indicate that there can be some health issues that he potentially faces this year. And a lot of people are saying that he has PTSD, which, yeah, duh. Like,
Someone tried to shoot him, of course.
yeah, like, of
So
course he has PTSD from that.
yeah. So I would just watch for those kinds of things. Considering that, the opposition is Saturn and other nations maybe are Mars, makes me think a lot about some speculation that Trump has kind of sabotaged the hostage deal indirectly through some of whatever he was talking about with Netanyahu or not. Like, I could see more of that kind of suspected interference coming into play. I could also see maybe some of the Mars trine Saturn stuff is learning more about foreign interference in elections in general, and that becoming a point of contention for the people in power, because it's like, what are you doing to stop it, right?
Hmm. Hmm. Yes. Okay. So, anything else you wanted to say here, or should we look at Trump?
Let's look at Trump. And I think we should start with the eclipses because the first eclipse of the fall is, I think, 5 days before the Libra ingress.
Yeah. Okay. So he's got an eclipse happening in Pisces. There's going to be a lot happening in Pisces. So we should definitely talk about all of that here too. Um, but yeah, he's going to be having an eclipse. It's going to be at 25 degrees Pisces. This is the eclipse is forming a trine to his time lord, to Venus. Um, no hard aspects though. Well, actually, wait a second. Oh my God. His moon. Yeah, it
His
is in a
his
square to
lim
his moon.
his
Yeah.
luminaries, yeah.
Okay. So that would not be, I mean, for someone, let's say someone was in poor health at his age, we don't have like all the information about his personal health, but that would be worrisome for someone who is in ill health for sure. Um, and yeah, being square to both his luminaries. Yeah, that would be worrisome for sure.
So another thing I like to do with eclipses is think about where it falls relative to the sect light, and what the 12th part of the eclipse is. So I think the degrees are like 25 and some change. I don't
Mhm.
remember.
Yeah.
So his sect light is that Gemini sun. That's a eclipse in the 10th, relative to the sect light. So there may be some implications for his role or, the authority he can seek. The sixth house gets activated through the 12th part because the 12th part is in Capricorn, right? Sixth house can have health implications, can have to do with people who work under you, people who undermine you, things like that. Also, I like to think of the sixth house as like, the little inconveniences of life that we have to deal with, right?
Oh, totally.
And given that this is still an eighth house eclipse, right? I'm wondering if there is something that happens during that eclipse that like makes it harder for him to have a path to the presidency, right?
Hmm.
I don't know if it's health related or something that involves like the use of like funds, like campaign financing. Like I know there was a story that got resurrected about how I think the Egyptian president gave Trump a lot of money like days before the election or something. So just finding out things like that and how that can undermine maybe his campaign would be something worth exploring. I think also about the decan placement of that eclipse. It feels like there's some kind of like sacrifice that people are making collectively to get something more positive. And it's like, I don't know if this looks like maybe throwing somebody he knows under the bus to like save his own skin, right? But then when you think about the Libra eclipse that happens right after, maybe like in exchange for, doing that thing, which everyone was invested in, there are some people you're close to you have to piss off, right? And you close yourself off to those things forever, to
Wow.
save your own ass.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. I love that. I love how you're using the 12 parts with the eclipse and everything. I love that. Um, I'm just thinking too how eclipses can elevate people or they can take people out. And because this is aspecting both of his luminaries, little bit wide actually for his moon, but I would count it for a luminary.
Hmm.
That's going to be a really big deal. And he is facing a ton of legal woes right now. I know that in September he's due to be sentenced in the Daniels case.
Do you know what
I
day?
don't off the top of my head. I don't. And also there's the debate. that he agreed to do on ABC. So that's coming in early September. And that
Mm-hmm.
eclipse is going to be shortly after that. So
Mm-hmm.
that could really shift the way he is perceived. The luminaries are like how people see us, how we shine. Um, and so that eclipse could really shift some things for him. I also just want to highlight what's going on in Pisces for him because his time lord this year, he's in a seventh house perfection year, is Saturn, and Saturn is moving through Pisces. So this is telling us a lot about his financial problems, which are stemming a lot from his legal problems. And Saturn's only going to move into Aries in the spring. So that's going to indicate like continued issues actually with the justice system, with the legal system. Um
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, and the other thing to your point too about um topics with people like funding him and everything like that. There was another story coming out about how he's taking a lot of campaign donations and putting them like in his own pockets, basically. So I think the eighth house, as far as the money that people are giving him, is absolutely going to be a big part of this for sure.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Like, and then when I think about the Libra eclipse, because that one is what, 10 degrees Libra?
Yeah.
And so that's, I think for him it's more significant because it's his chart ruler in fall getting eclipsed in the third, right? Which is not going to be a great experience for him by transit, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's interesting that that eclipse is squaring his natal Mercury, which is probably going to affect who he's aligned with, who he's not aligned with, and also his money, right? Because it's his supporters and the people around him who prop him up financially, right? The 12th part of that eclipse is actually in Aquarius in the seventh. So I do think that like it's possible that either he does something legally to save his own ass at the expense of retaining the support from some kind of benefactor, or vice versa, the benefactor realizes there is financial incentive to throw him under the bus, right? I could see either of those things being true.
Mm. Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Um, okay, so those are the eclipses. Let's see. I do want to pull up his
It's monthly
progress.
charts.
Yeah, I do want to get into those. I will also want to pull this up, his progressions. I might have shown this briefly in a previous video that we did together, but his progress midheaven, this is I'm using his secondary progressions, is moving into a conjunction with Pluto. And so that is a really big deal. A lot of times it's going to demonstrate a shift in one's career or how one's known, to be more Plutonian. And so Pluto can be someone who is really, really powerful. It could be someone who's ruthless, authoritative, someone who even is like in a seat of a lot of respect, even sometimes, but there's usually a little bit of intimidation factor with Pluto. So this could be like president, but I'm going to take my kid gloves off here for a minute and just say, you know, some of the things that he's said in recent rallies and everything like that. He's said things like, you'll never have to vote again, or he said things along the lines of, you won't have to vote in the next election. We're going to make it that way. So that's kind of a very Plutonian, authoritarian thing to say, combined with the group that he's trying to distance himself from, Project 2025, which is very like Christian nationalist agenda, that is very
Mm,
Pluto. So to see his midheaven aligning with Pluto like that, it's like someone who's going to do what they want to do no matter what, and they're willing to go to great lengths to exert their sense of power.
mm.
But sometimes Pluto takes us down too. So you kind of never know which way Pluto's going to drag you. But that's one that we definitely want to keep our eyes on.
Yeah, I wonder when his progressed ascendant. changed sign because that
So
looks pretty fresh.
yes, so that would have been about 3 years ago that that happened. So that
Oh,
would have been like right around the insurrection.
oh,
And just like going from this Libra, I want to appease different people, into Scorpio, which is like, I'm all or nothing.
no, but then that would also make sense because that progressed ascendant would have been ruled by a very happy Venus, right? Now that progressed ascendant is ruled by a not happy Mars, right?
Yeah.
Also the progressed moon in Scorpio as well. Yeah, no, the progressed moon dignity is also quite loud. And so I could see how going from having an experience where, okay, everybody's co-signing what you're doing because you got both benefics and Libra, right? And then all of a sudden you're enemy number one because the moon is not happy and it's answering to a busted malefic, right?
Yeah. And also, the progressed moon really just drives our own inner focus toward topics of home and family and property. So, those are things that are going to continue to call his attention a lot more deeply.
Mm,
In other words, this is his private life that's
yeah.
calling his attention. So, anyways, let's look at his monthly charts. Do you want to dive right into his monthlies, or should we just recap his solar return really quick?
Let's dive into the monthlies.
Yeah, let's do that. Okay. Um, yeah, so we can start with his September one, and I'll just pull up both charts. But just to recap briefly for people who are just catching us for the first time, he is in a seventh house perfection year ruled by Saturn. This is going to bring up the importance of opponents. He does have the lot of fortune here, which means that a lot of times the events connected to this year are because of the wheel of fate. It's things that are happening to him. For instance, this would also describe what happened with his original opponent, Biden. He did not anticipate that. So we're seeing themes of opponents and partnerships. This year is ruled by his 12th house Saturn in Cancer, connected with Venus. So we're going to see topics associated with women, associated with secret affairs, associated with his marriage. We're going to see challenges associated with that. And his solar return tells us a lot about financial and legal challenges. And we covered that in more detail in our first video that we did. So over here on our right is his monthly chart, his monthly return chart for September. The monthly return charts basically break down what's in the solar return, and they also offer us additional details. So they're going to tell us when things in the solar return are coming into prominence. So we're gonna get into those. The technique is complicated. Mo and I have learned this technique from Dr. Ali Alomi. So shout out to Ali Alomi and his Patreon. So if you want to learn more about this technique, definitely check him out. We're not gonna be able to go into this technique in detail because there's a lot of pieces and parts, but follow along and you may learn something here.
Yeah, I'm trying to see what his monthly perfection would be. So he's going to be starting that Venus
10th,
monthly
10th
perfection,
house. Yeah.
10th house. So a lot of stuff going on related to maybe like leadership type stuff. It's interesting that again, Venus is in the 12th and it's conjunct Saturn.
Mhm.
So I don't know. I find that anytime that his Venus is active, at least when I've been watching his perfections, because it's so close to Saturn, there's always some kind of obstacle around attaining like a position or like becoming an authority, right? So that's like going to be fascinating to watch.
Yeah. And this month actually looks very favorable for Trump. And speaking of Venus, because Venus is going to be like a secondary ruler for him for the month. And by the way, the month he's finishing up right now in August, we talked about that one last time, is a mess, and it is proven to be a mess. But this chart for him for September looks really positive. We've got Venus in Libra. here. And Venus loves being in Libra. She's got a great deal of dignity here. Venus is in a trine with Jupiter, and the moon is applying to both of them. So this could be a month where Trump kind of bounces back from the garbage month that he's having right now here at the time of this recording.
Yes. That being said, just given like the way that the ascendant is situated and like in the return natally and where the 12th part is, that's activating, the first house, second house, and fourth house respectively. So it feels like there's some kind of win. I'm not sure that it necessarily translates to anything going on with the polls, but considering that he has all these lawsuits and there are concerns about his ability to retain his assets, I would imagine that there's some kind of positive coming through, at least as far as the courts are concerned, that could allow him to protect some of his assets.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And also with it being a Leo on the ascendant, this is a month where he's feeling a lot more confident. And there's been a lot of criticism about how he was not doing as much appearances and things like that. So I would say that this is a month that he's campaigning and he's out there. Like Leo, it's visibility and it's a strength and confidence of self. Although the 12th part of the ascendant speaks to his fourth house. So topics of home and family are going to be important in this month as well.
True. Though, don't sleep on the fourth house as like confinement. It can also be that.
True.
Yeah.
True. Yeah. That was the original house of prison, for those of you that don't know.
Yeah.
um,
You know what? This does look like maybe having a big successful fundraiser at like Mar-a-Lago or something, just considering how the moon is configured to both benefics, off axis from both malefics. I could see that possibly being the case, right?
yeah. Or let's say he's due to be sentenced this month too. And again, this is like right his month his monthly chart begins like a few days before the eclipse. So I would guess that the sentencing would be probably around then, but I'm not certain on that. But maybe the fourth house then is suggesting that that's something that is on his mind, like
Mm,
facing the possibility that he could potentially have to serve some time and how insane that would be. But at the same time, the moon is making favorable aspects. So it's like he gets off from that, but there's still the embarrassment of having to make this appearance and it being highly publicized. So again, Leo speaking to something being publicized and your name in everyone's mouth. And Saturn here conjunct the lot of fortune now. The lot of fortune is ruled by Jupiter, which would imply that there's something favorable that happens here. Although Saturn, that's not fun. That's not fun. That's showing that there's something that he may have to take ownership of in a difficult way with Saturn on the lot of fortune.
hmm
And the moon is averse to fortune too, which also says that there's challenges this month. So while it looks overtly favorable, it looks like there's also challenges kind of going on amidst everything, but that I would say with the favorability of the moon, that it ultimately like ends well for him this month.
hmm Okay, let's look at October.
Okay, let's do it. Okay, so this is the
Okay.
October one.
I do want to preface this with it's the month of burden for Trump.
It
And
is.
that ascendant is in the seventh house with the return, lot of burden, right? I mean, this to me, looking at this chart, yes, it's nice that Venus is angular, right? Great, fantastic. Saturn ruling the chart is like not really making any hard aspect with Mars, for example. Great, but basically, I don't know. I don't see this going very well for Trump, considering that this is activating his seventh house, which is his perfected house, right? Um, that lot of burden is also pinging seventh house topics, right, around litigation or dealing with rivals and things like that. The 12th part is also in the seventh, but Aquarius is the return eighth. And so eighth house has a lot to do with loss and things like that. This to me feels like there's some kind of loss to a rival, loss pertaining to a partner, or disputes over shared resources with partner. I don't like that neither the 10th house ruler by whole sign or the ruler of the midheaven is in good shape. They both have horrible dignity, right? Sure, Mars is in joy, right? Mars can give gifts according to its nature. You know, if you want to incite violence, great. Mars loves that. Will it be well received? Absolutely not, right? So this feels like, not getting your way, possibly throwing a temper tantrum. Even though the sun is not um, ruling the chart, the sun ultimately will always say things about Trump because he is a natal Libra rising. The sun is not doing well, right? And Mars
Or
is like,
Leo rising.
yeah, sorry, Leo
Yes.
rising. So Mars is dog walking the sun. The sun is not happy, nor is Mars, right? But Mars has triplicity dignity and the sun does not. So this kind of does feel a little humiliating in a way, right?
Oh my God. I love how you just artfully delineated this. Yeah. And by the way, this is the month that contains the election.
Hmm.
So, just in case you didn't notice that, if someone's just listening to this, this is the month that contains the election. So, everything Mo just said, yeah. And I arrived at a similar conclusion, but looking at completely different elements. And that's why I love doing this with you because there's just so much to look at in these charts, and you can look at it from a couple different ways. So he is in a 11th house month here, ruled by Mercury, and Mercury is in his natal 12th house there. Um, and the other thing that I'm looking at here is his Time Lord is Saturn. And Mars is agitating his Time Lord right now. So some people would say that the heat of Mars would actually balance out the coolness of Saturn. And so that's why that can sometimes be beneficial. I heard Nick Dig and Best talking about that recently. So shout out to Nick Dig and Best, Chris Brennan, and Patrick Watson, who were also forecasting the election. I listened. Um, and yeah, so that was an interesting perspective from Nick, but I don't know. I see that as being ultimately irritating for him. And with the ascendant here in Aquarius, that's going to be speaking to his 12th part in his chart of his 12th house. So that also indicates like a 12th housey kind of experience, like feeling victimized, feeling attacked, feeling like I
Hmm.
have to pivot things a little bit. The other thing that looks super challenging here is the moon at 29 degrees Pisces. And that is the star shit. And I'm not pronouncing it correctly, but that is a star that is associated with profound loss, drowning,
Mm.
overwhelm. Um, and the way I would take the delineation for that star in a modern context would be like profound sorrow, basically, like being really crushed. And yeah, this moon does conjoin Neptune, which can indicate that there's a little bit of delusion happening there. But then what ultimately happens, though, is the moon is going to move into Aries. So he's not going to stay defeated for long. He is going to get back up on his horse and he is going to deny and he is going to fight tooth and nail for a different outcome. Um, but yeah, Mars on the lot of fortune there. And the lot of fortune in Cancer, I've seen that show up as moody. Like there's something really emotionally dominating about that period. And with Mars there, that's like, that could be embarrassment, rage, but also Mars in Cancer, like clinging to something, like clinging to a different outcome. So I don't think that this month looks good for Trump at all. So when I say it comes down to the nitty gritty, like I see Harris and Trump both rising. It comes down to a chart like this. It comes down to his monthly return chart, where everything about this chart is challenging. Everything about this chart says defeat of some kind to me.
I mean, yeah, sure. Venus in the 10th, cute, but Venus is in exile in Scorpio. And Venus, sure, she's in her own decan in Scorpio, but that's like a very clinging to rotting corpse necromancy Venus. That's not, cute. Everybody's like coming together like Pisces Venus, right?
Jealousy, envy. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, sure, the moon is separating from Venus, right? So that trine is nice, but again, that's like separating. And it could be that like there's possibly something positive related to, I don't know, the courts that's happening, just considering that Venus rules the ninth house.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that could be the way that that shows up. Maybe there's some kind of positive intervention that prevents like severe damage from whatever lawsuit he's got going on, or maybe one of his legal challenges, or his appeals not being thrown out or something, and that being like one sliver of hope he can hold on to. But I think that it's just not feeling very positive or constructive, in my opinion, in terms of actually taking the helm, but could be positive for getting to, again, retain some assets or to have like maybe a small win, but not the win that you need to like push you over the edge.
Totally. And to reiterate and emphasize what you brought up about this being his month of burden, that is an indication of an incredibly difficult month. And the lot of burden does connect with the seventh house of opponent. So I just want to reiterate what you said here, Mo, because that's really important. That's a really important key for this. And you mentioned that the ascendant is at the degree of his
N-
solar return burden, or just the
no,
his,
it's in the same sign. Same
yeah.
sign.
Okay. I couldn't remember the degree.
I think it's at like 1 degree.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think, yeah, wait. Yeah, I think you're right. Okay. So, should we look at the next one?
I kind of want to look at the next few leading up to January
Yes,
because
let's do
I
that.
think it's helpful to sort of see the timelines that people are on, just so that people know what's going to happen. Because, like I said at the beginning, I don't think this is going to be one of those like clear cut, oh, there's a clear winner. If someone's going to win by a thread, it will be contested.
Agreed.
So,
Yeah. So, this is his 12th house perfection month. So, this is a month ruled by the sign of Cancer, ruled by the moon. So, the luminaries are going to be really important here, specifically the lunations. So, we would want to look at the lunations for this month. This is the month where he reaches his Time Lord. So over here he reaches his Time Lord Saturn over here. So
mhm.
this is what I would call the momentous month. And I got this phrasing from Olomi. He doesn't actually call it the momentous month, but he was describing how when you arrive at the house of the Time Lord, that it's a momentous, there's things that are happening that are very momentous. So I just call it the momentous month. And I've been playing with that, and I find that it is a month where there's a lot of themes from the solar return coalescing. So we saw themes of, again, financial problems, marital and opponent challenges, health challenges in his solar return. So we can expect, even just without even looking at the monthly return chart, just looking at that alone, we know that those themes from the solar return are going to become really accentuated here. There's going to be some really pivotal things that define his year that happen in this period.
Yeah, the first thing that stood out to me was the ascendant in Aries activating his ninth house. Um,
Yeah.
with the 12th part also being in the 12th. Like there are all these charts that have the 12th part in the 12th, and so there's a lot about dealing with loss or transition. And this to me feels like invoking the courts to you know, deal with loss of election, or it could be there's something going on legally that affects like his ability to hold office, period, right? It does feel like I did put in my notes that it does feel like there are legal matters being put to rest, particularly with that exalted moon. Sure, Mars is like slowing down and gonna turn retrograde, but I would argue, aside from the separating square from Mars, is the moon, I think, is applying to Venus, if not in a trine with Venus already. And so that does feel like maybe some resolution around the legal stuff. But
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that looks like a pretty happy moon to me. I mean, it's separating from a square from Mars, which would be an indication of like a harsh loss of some kind, which we saw in the previous monthly return. Um, and it's separating from Venus. So it's like there's a loss, but there's also support going on. And so, kind of the picture that these charts are painting for me is that he loses, but he's reinvigorated by his base support, and that he's able to kind of push back with a lot of encouragement and support behind him. And he's got friends in high places because he put them there in the courts. Um, so yeah, this chart absolutely, aside from the 12th part of the ascendant being associated with this 12th part, does look a lot more favorable to me. This is also a month of joy for him.
Hmm.
So yeah, at least that's what I had written down. Let me
Wait,
see.
no,
Maybe
no, no.
not.
December, the next month.
Oh, okay. Oops. I was looking at the wrong one. So wait a second. Yeah, okay. So this is yeah, okay. I was looking at the wrong thing. Um, but look at Venus on the midheaven there. That is overtly positive. Like that is a testament of things that are happening favorably. And Venus is in good condition here. She's in Capricorn. Venus has triplicity here. That means that you have some level of support. Um, Looking at the lunations, I'm not going to pull up the chart here, but I just have it written down. It's interesting because there's a full moon on November 15th. So you can kind of visualize it even by looking at this chart.
Hmm.
It's on his midheaven and it conjoins Uranus. So again, we've seen Uranus hanging out on his midheaven. We saw the narrow survival of an assassination attempt. We're seeing right now Uranus is stationing on his midheaven, and there's this whole Arlington cemetery scandal, and soldiers are like denouncing him and things like that. So Uranus brings surprises, and for the record, Uranus is stationing in a square with Mercury, so that's why it's like a big and shocking news story that's going on. It's a scandal. So Uranus can be scandals, it can be shock. But this is a full moon conjunct Uranus on his midheaven. Combined with what Mars is doing in his first house, I don't know. Like it looks like that 12th house would be like he's plotting something,
Yeah.
a secret plot. And fortune in Mercury's sign, that would be events around like speeches and literature and writing things and media. Like those things would be really important piece of what he's trying to accomplish this month.
You know what else also stands out to me is that if you look at this chart as a standalone, Mars is in the fifth, right?
Hmm.
So I feel like maybe Trump almost like making a comeback as like a media personality because he's kind of fallen off a little bit. And I think that for some reason, maybe something involving social media. I wouldn't be surprised if Elon is involved. Remember, they had that interview. Something like that, I think, may become more obvious during this month, right?
Yeah. And I mean, let's not forget everything going on with Jupiter and Gemini and just misinformation
Mm-hmm.
and the power of social media, the power of these tech giants. Because when you look at the ingress chart for Jupiter and Gemini, it's in a trine with Pluto and Aquarius. And we're seeing that like in the month of August with the square with Saturn, we're seeing like Zuckerberg come out and say, like, I shouldn't have censored things. We're seeing the CEO of Telegraph like get arrested. And we're seeing the hammer come down and the discernment come down on all the misinformation and the manipulation of media for personal gain and everything like that. So this Mercury retrograde that's coming up here opposite Jupiter, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's going to be a big story of this period that we're in, just
Mm-hmm.
alone. So I think you're right about the friendship and alliance thing and the partnership thing. And we see that in the solar return, and that all coalesce this month too, how he's in a seventh house year. So that seventh house person could quite easily be Elon Musk, like trying to help him out
Mm-hmm.
um, after and try to like push this narrative of the election is illegitimate and the Democrats cheated and all of that.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, December.
All right, let's look at December. Okay. So he's in a first house month ruled by the sun. We've got Sagittarius rising here. That's always like a very confident energy to have. I think of like the centaur running bravely ahead, like whether that's in a moment of battle or a moment of like freedom, like I
Mm-hmm.
got away with it kind of thing. Um,
Yeah, and this is a month of joy. It's also one of those months where the moon sees fortune as well. Like, I think this is a month where things go pretty well for Trump. Do I think this means that he's going to be president? I don't think so. I think you could argue that Mercury being on the ascendant, ruling the midheaven, could give testimony to that, but Mercury is retrograde, right? It's not happy. It's ruled by a lord that's also not happy. Technically, they have mutual reception, if you want to call it that. But this does feel like possibly getting to incite people to do things on your behalf. Considering that I've noticed that when his monthly perfections come to the Leo month, right? Because Mars is active by virtue of being in Leo, and then it becomes the D9 helper, he tends to be inciting people to do something or say something. And I think that with the ascendant being in that first decan of Sagittarius, he's definitely doing that. And then to add insult to injury, like that last decan sun in Sagittarius, it's a little fashy, just a little fashy. This would also be the month that covers the period where I suspect that there will probably be January 6th, 2.0, right? Um, this looks like a month where you successfully convince people that your version of events are reality, regardless of whether, they're real or not, right? And getting people to sort of do your bidding, if you will.
yes, that's the vibe I'm getting as well. And everything I just said about Jupiter and Gemini collectively, it's right here on his lot of fortune, telling us about events that happen. So the different streams of what the truth is. And with Jupiter and Gemini, it's like this understanding that, well, this could be true and this could be true. And if you say it enough times, it will be true, which Trump has said himself. But yeah, I would agree with you that this is a month where things are definitely going his way, especially with the moon with fortune, Jupiter with fortune. But look, I mean, this is the first monthly return for him that we're seeing Mars retrograde. And it's coming into that opposition with Pluto. And yeah, I mean, the oldest adage I have that I learned about Mars retrograde is you don't want to be the one who throws the first stone, because the person who like throws the first brick first is gonna lose. So if this is indeed when um like the rebuttal comes in, like where we would see people showing up on Capitol Hill, it's not going to end well. And something that a lot of people have pointed out is that he was a sore loser the last time. What's going to happen when he loses to a woman, particularly a woman of color? So we may, like, while I think some of his support may be dwindling, I think the people who are still supporting him are supporting him in an even stronger, more loyal way and are
Mm-hmm.
willing to go to even greater lengths to save America, in their words. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah. Considering that the ascendant is doing like both fifth and ninth things, but again, like we have a 12th part activating the fifth as well. I'm like, okay, feels like kind of like being able to like rally people and have more people show up on his behalf, since the fifth house can describe those people who acts as like your agents and things like that. I do think that something constructive around maybe winning a legal challenge as well, which may also empower him a little bit. So it could also have to do with some of his other legal stuff too. So,
certainly. Yeah. And I mean, Jupiter could be saying things about that conjunct fortune too. Another thing to point out is that he's in an Aquarius ruled year. So we see Venus entering Aquarius here too. So Venus in Aquarius could help him out, though Pluto is also there. And there's also Mars. Like I keep forgetting, I guess like this isn't something I've deeply considered even, that Mars opposite Venus. Like this could be very literal battle of the sexes going on here. Um at this point. Like you
yeah,
yeah.
I think with Venus like ruling the 11th as well, and just noting that the South Node is also there in the return, does look like permanently alienating oneself from like a larger group as too. So I'm wondering if there's also some kind of shift either amongst people who are kind of a part of a fragile coalition that is his base, or like the Republican Party at large, if like that's sort of where the hammer comes down, so to speak.
Yeah, I can't remember the exact month. Um, but I was seeing this in JD Vance's chart, and I think that there's a lot of tensions with Trump around this time. And I think this is where you might see the Mars retrograde in Leo of two people who want power no matter what, go to great lengths to try to save their own ass, basically. Like I could see Vance at a certain point, not this month, but hereafter, like kind of going on his own way. But I think that there will be definite tensions between them both here at this time. Um, the other thing that I was noticing with this is Saturn on the angle here. So
Hmm.
that doesn't bode well either. I mean, that shows that there's some level of weightiness or seriousness or consequence that is kind of putting his feet on the ground here. Like there's something that he can't ignore and run away from. And look, I mean, the moon runs into Saturn first before it runs into Jupiter. So I think it's this chart is one that kind of is denying the realities, but is happy that there's a fan base behind him willing to do whatever it takes to alter the outcome. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I could definitely see that. I am looking at my notes for JD Vance's I think it's his December chart. Um he gets two December charts because of where his birthday is, but
Oh,
the one that covers most of December and not like January,
oh, true. Yeah.
that one is in his natal, the ascendant is in his natal 12th house. So, and I think it's in the return fourth with the 12th part in the 11th. And I was like, oh, that feels like getting sent home or like
Mm,
working with certain groups behind someone's back or like being confined or held back in some way, right?
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, I actually wrote down, oh my God, in my notes, I wrote Trump abandoned question mark for that month. So it is that month because he's in a ninth house month ruled by Mars. Mars is
Hmm.
retrograde. And there's something about, gosh, there's something about the Mercury Jupiter opposition
Uh-huh.
that's really important for him. I think because Jupiter's his time lord. Jupiter is his time lord that month. So I suspect that there's a lot of tension between Vance and Trump at
I
this
mean,
time.
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, considering that I've seen Trump campaign more with RFK Jr. than I have seen him interact with Vance. Like,
Yeah.
what's going on there? Like,
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I would think that that doesn't feel good for his all Vance's Leo placements. So, I would suspect that like he's in it to win it right now, and so he's not going to say a whole lot, but at this point like when everything kind of appears to be collapsing, then how loyal is he still going to be? How supportive is he still going to be? Because there's the pressure is definitely going to be on at that time, and
hmm
that could split people apart. All
yeah,
right, so let's look at the next month.
January.
All right, so at this point he is in a second house month. Oh, well, the important thing too about him being in a sun ruled month before is that like a lot of eyes and attention are on him. Okay, so here we're in a month ruled by Mercury. He's in a second house month here. Um, okay. So this is when the inauguration is supposed to happen.
Hmm.
So we know that things are going to be contested. So this month would likely tell us what happens. Does he eventually get inaugurated or not? Um, all right.
I had mixed feelings about this one because, like, with the ruler of the 10th in the first, I would say that could be testimony, but looking at the condition of that Mars, not only is it retrograde, it's at maximum fall, right? Sure, the moon is applying to Mars, they're mutually applying, but the moon will hit the sun first, right? As well as Venus and Saturn. So I'm just like, I'm not sure that this is giving I taking the helm, especially when that ascendant falls in the natal 12th, right?
Yeah.
It's in the return fourth house, and the 12th part is in his sixth, right? So I was just like, okay, maybe he's I don't know, like I'm trying to figure this out. I'm like, is he going to go home? Like, I don't know what this is. This does look like maybe being undermined in some way a little bit. Um, I
Yeah.
do think that that Mars being angular, retrograde, and fallen feels again good for inciting violence. Absolutely. Because this is also the build up to the halfway point of the Mars retrograde as well,
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I mean, to me, a Cancer ascendant in the monthly return chart is like very, it's sensitive, it's vulnerable. There's something about wanting to protect something, to secure something, to hold on to something. It's not the most like confident, celebratory kind of rising sign for this month, which you would expect to see for someone who's being inaugurated after a big fight. That said, the moon looks pretty happy here. The moon is always content in the sign of Cancer. It is making lovely aspects to Venus and Saturn, um, which is nice. Like the moon is happy. So there's something about this month that he is happy about. The sun is angular. So there's something about visibility there. Mercury conjunct Fortune would be some kind of like speech of some kind. And Neptune up here on the midheaven, that's kind of like fame or culty or just like people being really enthralled or like paying attention to you. I think having Neptune on your midheaven expands your reach. Like you're in everyone's living room at the time, which obviously he would be. So there's a lot of nice things to say about this monthly return chart, except for, yeah, Mars, basically. And the 12th part of the ascendant being his sixth house. So that would be kind of challenging. The other thing I notice, and I don't always look at this in the monthly charts, but Pluto conjunct Spirit, like I'm paying attention to Pluto for him because Pluto is in his sign of the year. And I keep seeing Pluto show up for him, like with his progressions and everything like that. So I don't know. I suspect that, let's say he doesn't win, right? He's still going to claim victory in some regard. Like he's still going to amass his following. And that's the thing about the Neptune and Aries stuff that I worry about is that Neptune and Aries corresponds with a lot of disputes over who owns what territories. Like I've seen that historically. And we've seen it show up a lot with civil disputes. So I'm not ruling out that he could rise to some seat of some alternative entity of some kind.
yeah, it looks like taking the helm by force. A lot of people not being happy with it, and not because you were elected democratically. I also don't like how in this chart, this time with the Venus, not Venus, Jupiter Saturn square, Saturn is direct, but Jupiter is not, right? Um, that again is just giving issues with maybe legal matters, the courts, things like that. The interesting thing for me was for the fact that the moon is in aversion with the midheaven ruler. I was like, okay, there's some kind of denial there, maybe, of some kind of station. Maybe the courts don't rule in his favor in terms of how that goes. But like, because Jupiter's again not in good condition, there's still room for interpretation, right? Or room to challenge whatever's happening with the results and the legitimacy of those results, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And I mean, again, Mars retrograde, it's still on his Time Lord right now. It's still moving in close to this Venus Saturn over here. So I don't think that's going to be easy for him. Um, but yeah, I mean, the rest of this chart looks like he's doing well in some regard, right?
he's
All
leading
right.
something that I don't think it's anything good, personally. Um,
I
yeah.
agree. I agree. I'm trying to be very objective, but the instinct that I get is that it's like a counter movement of some kind.
Okay, I think this is a great time to pivot to Kamala, and
Yes.
we could talk about the eclipses for her and the September chart for her. And
Okay.
then obviously when we talk about October, we'll have to really talk about her solar return.
Yes. Okay, so we'll get into that here in a minute. I'm just gonna pull up with the transits for her too. Okay, so I got those too. All right. Well, I like the way you interpret eclipses, so take it away.
Yeah, so yes. Right before we start our Libra ingress, we have that Pisces eclipse, right? It's in her 10th house, obviously, but we also have to think about what that means relative to her sect-light and where the 12th part of that eclipse is. So the 12th part of her eclipse is in Capricorn, which is activating the 8th house. Um, and the eclipse is 12th from her sect-light. I do think that there is some implication around her taking on more of an authoritative role in everything that's happening. But again, I think it's under duress and difficult circumstance. I wouldn't be surprised if there's stuff going on with both the conflict in the Middle East and even maybe some of the stuff in Ukraine that like she has to take on a more active role in. And if that coincides with maybe some more scrutiny towards her, um, there could also just be this realization of how maybe people might be working against you or sabotaging your attempts at, trying to take the helm. I could also see that being very obvious during this particular phase of her campaign, right? Um, the Libra eclipse, on the other hand, is interesting because that's both a fifth house eclipse, but also it's seventh from her sect light. So there's something about partnership that's implied. And then the 12th part of that falls in Aquarius, which is the ninth. So there's something about legal matters, partnerships, things like that. I'm wondering if, like, again, there's something about her possibly needing to maybe even break direction in terms of like who's representing her campaign, and defining like her policy and her stances, because some people do suspect that some of the leftover Biden staffers that are a part of her campaign are suggesting that she makes moves that are not helping her, right? And I wouldn't be surprised if, she needs to get rid of some of these people. And if that contributes to some of the issues with Mars and Cancer, right? Where it's like, okay, you're starting to alienate more people the more you try to please everybody. So I could see that being sort of how that starts to unravel for Kamala.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because we have seen, and I haven't looked at this for all the US presidents, but the last few have been inaugurated and elected with eclipses happening in their first house. Um, for Kamala Harris, these eclipses are happening in her 10th house and they are happening in a square with her ascendant. So that would be indicative of a rise for an individual. Um, yeah, and then the Libra one, it's interesting too because with the eclipses that have been happening in Aries and Libra, we've seen this all over the world where leaders are falling and new blood, people who are fresh, are coming into power. And so for her to be even nominated under the Aries Libra eclipse, it's fascinating because both of her luminaries are there. So I could totally see a win for her based on these eclipses moving into her 10th alone because
Hmm.
of that. It like if we're just looking at eclipses, it looks more favorable for her than for Trump, even though his are hitting his luminaries, but it's happening from the eighth house. Eclipses in an angular house, that is something that will shift your life. I mean, eclipses to your luminaries would too, but I just think like an angular eclipse is going to be a little bit more favorable, I would say.
Yeah, I think it's actually been true for quite a few and it's not just a US thing. Like, for example, when Justin Trudeau won re-election in 2021, we were in the Gemini Sag cycle. He's a 10th house Gemini person. Like, Yeah, he didn't win a majority government like he wanted, but like it was very clear. Yeah, I looked at that and I was like, he's probably gonna win if we just consider what the eclipses are doing alone. Like it was a little crazy. I would also argue that like even just like where the nodes will be transiting, which is another reason why I'm compelled to say Kamala is likely to win, is because, the North Node will be moving into Pisces. And
Yeah,
I find that that nodal axis is very telling. She'll be less involved at home or with private life and be forced to become very public and visible, right? Trump
totally.
doesn't have that same juice going right now. Maybe like ironically during what, 2022 when the nodes were in Taurus, Scorpio, sure, but we
Yes.
didn't have an election then. So,
Right. Right. Exactly. Exactly.
so
Well, I want to talk about Saturn and Venus retrograde in her 10th house too. I know we're going to see that in the monthly chart. So I'll just briefly give an overview of it here. She's had Saturn moving through her 10th house. And we've talked about this on here before, but it can sometimes indicate someone taking on a really important duty or task under difficult circumstances. And it can also be difficulty and like major adversity and obstacles in your role. And Saturn also represents like an outsider. Saturn represents someone who's different, and the United States has never elected a woman to the role of presidency before. And so there's going to be certain challenges that she faces based upon that alone, even though that doesn't seem to be a huge issue for folks at this juncture, but still, just the symbolism is important enough to point out. But what's interesting here, and this fits with Trump too. He's having Saturn move through his eighth, and so he's having some difficulties there. When Venus moves into Pisces, that's going to take some of the edge off. And that first happens in January. Venus moves into Pisces in January, which is inauguration. So for Trump, that would be some kind of relief with his eighth house. For Harris, that's going to be some kind of relief for her career.
mhm.
Venus will go retrograde, and that's a whole other thing. But um, it is interesting to note that in January, Venus does offer Saturn a little bit of relief.
Yeah, I like thinking of the three conjunctions Venus will make to Saturn as renegotiating the terms of a relationship, right? This is what I have to offer that's nice and fun. This is what I have to offer in terms of tangible boundaries and limits, right? And these are going to be the rules of engagement. I do think that that whole Mars going direct, not quite coming to blows with Venus, and then Venus moving back into exaltation, where she will be trining a very not happy but direct Mars, will allow for some kind of everybody can coalesce behind some ideal that, works well in practice. Sorry, in theory, but I think that given that Venus is with Saturn and Mercury will also join the fray because it will be retrograding from Aries to Pisces as well. I've been telling my clients that given that Mercury is not in great shape, Saturn struggles with holding shape or form in water signs, and the North Node, aka Rahu, tends to have us chasing ghosts a bit. Okay, great. We have the resources and means and buy-in to do something, but the execution is just not feasible. It doesn't make sense. And I think that's going to be the challenge, right? With dealing with that Venus retrograde coming out of Mars retrograde. Um, so it's almost like people are a little too idealistic with no follow through. So,
Yes. 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 Reasonable. Yes, very reasonable. Yeah. And yeah, I just wanted to pull up the transits here. And we'll show this for Trump too. But this is the inauguration date. Not the correct time. But look at that. Venus conjunct Saturn. So that's like again, like offering some relief here. This is like a moment where the pressure is kind of like off for this day in a way. Like you're dealing with all this crap up to this moment, and then immediately after you're back to work. But this is a moment where it's like, this is nice. I earned this. Like I can have my dessert right now, and then I'm going to go back and hit it. But I would say that that is a moment that everyone can look forward to in their Saturn and Pisces story. But for her, it's her 10th house.
Yeah, another thing is that so the inauguration chart, assuming that like it's even going to happen on the 20th, right?
Right, right. I know I
We're making
Googled
that
that.
we're making that big assumption that like this is going to be normal, right?
I know.
Um, God willing, it's normal, right? It's always a Taurus rising chart, like usually mid-Taurus, with the sun in Aquarius in the 10th whole sign house. I think the midheaven is usually at the end of Capricorn somewhere. And Venus could be either in Pisces, Aquarius, or Capricorn. A great chart for inaugurating someone into power and making them beholden to the people, considering the sun's dignity. I find it fascinating that it's not only Venus in the 11th house in Pisces, her exaltation, it's Venus conjunct the ruler of both the 10th whole sign house and the midheaven, which to me it's like, okay, it's giving elevation of a woman under difficult circumstances. I don't know. Um, so I was leaning more towards, okay, this kind of implies, okay, we're maybe breaking some kind of barrier in terms of putting a woman in charge, right? Um, that being said, I know Dr. Lomi says that it's helpful to look at this chart and how well it aligns with um,
The
the
candidate.
the candidates, but I feel like after Obama, the charts just don't align as obviously.
Cue the conspiracy theories.
So I was like, I don't know if that's just a decline in the quality of candidates ever since or what, but the only thing that is aligning with, say, the Trump Vance ticket is that this is the lunar return of JD Vance, right?
Hmm.
Okay, sure. Trump got lucky in 2017 because that was his Jupiter return, and that was actually making that square to his what was it? Saturn Venus conjunction, and then there was something else going on in like Leo Aquarius. I don't remember.
Hmm.
Um, but Obama's both of them were very obvious. One was like not only a lunar return, but he's an Aquarius rising, so it's like duh.
Hmm.
Um, the only thing that's making me lean towards Harris Walls is that Venus Saturn conjunction in the 11th. I think Walls is either a late Capricorn or an early Aquarius moon. We don't have a birth time for him, so that's quite compelling. And yes, JD Vance is a Libra moon, but Kamala is also a Libra sun, right? So, um, and then Gemini would be with the rising and luminary for both Trump and Kamala. So that's why it's like the jury's still out on like who this chart is more aligned with. It's not obvious. It's not clear cut.
It's
So
not. Yeah. And also another thing, I believe this was Nick Dagan Best who pointed this out. This is the first time we're going to see the inauguration chart with Pluto conjunct the sun. Like we haven't seen that in probably since we started doing inaugurations, but those weren't at this time of year. Like we only started doing it this time of year, I believe in the 19th century. So
yeah.
yeah. So this is really the first time that we're seeing this signature. So that could be compelling for how we would interpret this role. The sun being the leadership, the sun being president, conjunct Pluto. Could that be some of the things that we're seeing with Trump in his chart? Could that
Hmm.
be, and I know we've talked about this a lot on here too, but with Harris's luminaries, um, she's completing her Pluto return right now, or not her Pluto return. The
Where?
the Pluto return that's happening right now is in an exact configuration with her luminaries. So she's really plugged into that. And as Pluto has just retrograded back into Capricorn, like as we speak yesterday, we're seeing the last of that. And that is going to span until middle of November. Um, so yeah, there's something Plutonian perhaps personally for her in that, but also to see a first female president, that would be very Plutonian. That would be like a nice kind of capstone on the United States Pluto return. Is it going to be that pretty with a nice little bow on it? No. Pluto returns are usually pretty nasty. I don't think we've seen the worst of it yet. I think this last little stretch of Pluto and Capricorn, especially with that Mars retrograde, is going to get nasty.
Well,
We're going to see ultimate, like, how corrupt things really are.
well, I also think people, for those of you who, use the outer planets, I don't, but something that people don't notice is that a lot of the institutions that make up the US government, sure, the declaration was signed when Pluto was in Capricorn, but a lot of those things kicked off with Pluto in
In
Aquarius,
Aquarius.
namely the Supreme Court, right? And given everything that's happening, and I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't matter like what your political alignment is. If the courts step into this election and have to decide, which is looking quite likely, I think that a lot of people will, I mean, rightfully be frustrated with the court as a concept. And I think that some of the maybe Pluto in Aquarius, but I think both the shifts of Jupiter as well as Saturn, coming in 2025 will spark more conversations about different connotations of what the courts are supposed to do and what those limitations should be. Um, yeah, it just doesn't look fun for the Supreme Court to exist in its current state. Like, I don't think that's going to be a thing, and that's going to be something that becomes increasingly obvious, especially after this election. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Good point. Good point about Pluto and Aquarius for sure. Yeah, and I would definitely agree with you. All right, so let's get into Kamala Harris's solar return. So we're gonna pull it up. We're gonna look at it as a solar return. We're also gonna look at it as like her first monthly return. Because
monthly
I think
chart.
we have looked at her solar return before.
Yeah,
I
a little
think,
bit.
yeah. So let's get into it.
Okay, so this is a Gemini perfection. And so for those of you who use the houses as a shorthand, first house perfection year, everything perfects back to its natal position. She's initiating a new 12-year cycle, right? Great. That's activating Mercury in the sixth, who also rules the fourth house, right? And so this does look like, again, maybe some challenging things involving the minor inconveniences of life that you have to deal with, very sixth house. The sixth house can also be weirdly like law enforcement, militaresque. And so I'm not totally surprised that her speech was very militant, but like it was very jarring and it was a lot. It was giving, I'm a more effective version of Hillary, what Hillary Clinton was trying to be when she was running for president, because they have a similar layout such that they have Mars in Leo and they've got Mercury in Scorpio ruling the
Aren't they
chart.
both Gemini rising too? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Um, yeah, and so I could see that being sort of the overall theme and vibe, right?
hmm
Um, I would say for her, again, if you're going to be someone who is vying for the position of commander in chief, watch for injury or people trying to harm you. I think that's another thing that people shouldn't sleep on for Trump as well, given that Saturn is also ruling the sixth house, right? Sixth house can be illness just as much as like, quite literally injury, whether it's accidents, assassination attempts, things like that, right?
Yeah.
So par for the course.
We've seen it. We've seen it in action already. Yeah.
Yeah. I also look at perfections from the sect light personally. So moon's back to Aries, that Mars is super active. Mars and Decan rallying the troops to do something, right? great for campaigning, great for raising money, like with other people. Um, Mars ruling the sixth as well, there can be like a vaguely activistic or organizing bent. I find that people who have that sixth house ruler in the third or vice versa, they tend to have that kind of energy, right? So, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, so with Gemini being her sign of the year, we also get like a lot of emphasis on her persona being more visible, awareness of how one interfaces with others. And with Rahu there, the North Node, I mean, she's doing a lot. She's doing a lot this year for sure. And to like boost up her image and everything like that. Because with the ruler natally in a cadent house in Scorpio, like she usually like that was one of the criticisms of her for the longest time was that like we didn't know who she was, right? But this year it seems like she's gonna still continue to ride this energy of what Mars Jupiter has been doing in her first house since she got the nomination. But in her solar return chart, we see Jupiter in Gemini. So that's going to benefit her this year. And so when we look at what Jupiter is doing for Trump, who is a Gemini sun, for her, it's a little stronger because it's her sign of the year. Um, in her solar return chart, looking at Mercury, her ruler of the year, it's not done any favors. Like we look at the condition of Mercury in the natal chart, it's not very strong. Um, Here, it's not like it's any better. Okay. So
No,
if we're going to judge, is she going to see an increase or a decrease with topics connected with like the first house or the fourth house? It's almost like the bar is still there. Like it's not really getting a lot better or worse. Um, and as far as aspects go to Mercury, um, Mercury's getting a little bit more action here in the solar return chart. There's a trine, like a trine with Saturn, which could be, we could say a lot for like um, duties and challenges that you're willingly taking on, or things that benefit you in the long run, things that challenge you in a good way. So there's something to be said about that. Although Saturn is really strong in this chart, Saturn conjoins the angle, which for me is going to emphasize a lot about what Saturn as a transit is doing, how important that is in the year ahead, even though Saturn isn't her time lord. So we know that that story of Saturn in the 10th house is going to be really significant for her this year. And we've talked about that a lot, about how that could easily indicate someone who's taking on a really important role, but they're faced with immense pushback, challenge, criticism.
hmm.
Like you mentioned about the global conflicts that are going on. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's not fun. That's why when I'm like, okay, I do think that there is some chance for elevation, given that the 11th house ruler is conjunct the ascendant in this chart, and what is the natal 10th house ruler is in her first natally, conjoining her ascendant pretty wide, but like close enough, right? I do think that there is a real chance for her to take the helm, for example, right? Um, I didn't like how this chart has that enemies of the moon configuration, right? So you've got the moon in a human sign. So the humane signs are the air signs plus Virgo, for those who don't know. And you have this configuration when the moon is in one of those signs opposing a benefic. We have that. And one of the malefics is making a hard aspect. So that's Saturn. And
Hmm.
so I said, when I saw that chart, I was like, yeah, I think she's going to win and she will be accused of stealing the election. But as I've like watched the news cycle, I'm wondering if she may also take increasing amounts of blame for um, what happens to be Joe Biden's foreign policy, considering that Jupiter is in the seventh house of the return chart, right? Getting those harsh aspects from Saturn as well.
True. Yeah. Well said. Yeah. Um, yeah, it's interesting too. So her, and this is what made me think that we would see a Biden Harris win before he dropped out and everything like that, is that it's interesting that her ascendant is the same degree in the solar return as his natal ascendant. And so what you said about taking the fall for what is ultimately his foreign policy is fascinating to me, because I'm like, well, how is he going to influence her year? So a lot of it is probably like carrying on his legacy, and because she still sings his praises and everything like that, but there's also maybe taking the fall for him in some of his policies too.
Mm-hmm.
And this happens to be Sagittarius is her natal seventh house. So there's something about partnership that has a defining place in the year ahead. And I think despite the condition of Mercury being not abysmal, but not great, um, would be that Venus conjoins the ascendant and that Jupiter is in her sign of the year. So there is a benefic presence here. There's a definite benefic presence in the solar return that Trump just doesn't have.
Yeah.
Furthermore, Venus on the ascendant is going to call in topics associated with her natal fifth house, which would be abortion, having the right to choose what happens to your body and things like that, reproductive justice, reproductive freedom. That is like
Mm-hmm.
her main platform right now that's winning voters, as well as the memes and things like that. But I mean, that could be a fifth house thing too, in a way. I would say
Mm-hmm.
maybe more third house, but anyhow, Venus also rules her natal 12th. So calling in like hidden plots, hidden enemies, and what you mentioned about watching out for like physical threats to her health. I mean, with Mercury being the Time Lord, being in the crosshairs of the Mars Pluto opposition that's going to be happening in Aries, Aquarius, absolutely. Absolutely. Like definitely hire better security detail than Trump.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah, for sure. When I think about the 12th parts of where everything is sitting, like it's like a mixed bag. So with the ascendant being in the 12th part of her natal eighth, like again, there's something about inheriting things. There is some degree of loss that's implied. I do think that some of that has more to do with, again, inheriting the failures of Joe Biden's foreign policy, right? And
Yeah.
that being the thing where, regardless of whether she wins or loses, I'm leaning towards win for her. You know, it's one thing if she loses, because then it's like, okay, you're blamed for that's the reason you lost. But it's another thing that it's like, okay, even though you weren't like in the driver's seat, this is still an administration that you're part of, right? Like you have to answer for this
Mhm.
somehow, right? Um, Now I think it's also interesting that the midheaven's 12th part is in her 10th house. So that's again giving me some kind of signal that, okay, maybe there's some kind of like implied elevation that's going on, and that's going to affect, sort of her legacy, given that the midheaven falls in her natal fourth.
Mhm.
Um, let's see. And then where the different lots are sitting, I love that both spirit and burden are in the natal 11th. So there's something about like winning over alliances and forming coalitions that's going to be a focus, but then like also dealing with challenges from other people, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and what you mentioned too about the lots, like looking at the lot of fortune, being in the second house, like connected with her second house, and Mars is right there. This is implying the importance of the Mars retrograde and how that's going to highlight topics of finances. I'm really curious to see how that shows up, because initially, when I created my forecast and outlined everything for her, I was imagining that there would be like challenges to her campaign funds and things like that, like seeing strong themes for her with ninth house and second house things. And at this point, like I haven't heard too much develop about that. So I'm genuinely curious what the Mars retrograde in her second house is really going to be about. Now, I know it's going to square her luminaries. And so she's going to feel that very personally. Again, Mars can be exhaustion, but it can also like really fire a person up, and you can become warlike with Mars retrograde happening in a really important place in your chart. 'Cause remember, Mars is closer to Earth at that time. So the topics of conflict and the potential to get involved in conflict is higher, even though the main message of Mars retrograde is like pivot, rest, reflect, like redirect, but you still see conflict heat up in a really big way. And so for this to be showing up in her solar return, we
Mm-hmm.
can't underestimate what that Mars retrograde in Cancer is going to do. And let's say that this second insurrection-like event does happen. She's at the crux of that.
Yeah.
The other thing is her moon, the moon in the seventh house. That's going to show a certain level of importance around relationships, around a person's sense of well-being. So on one hand, you've got like Jupiter there. I think that's her running mate, Walls. Like, he's a quite likable guy, in my opinion. But look
Mm.
at, we've got the moon running into Saturn first. That's the first aspect that the moon makes. So the year starts off rough. The year starts off rough. So I would say that, a contested election would fit that description of the square of Saturn. Saturn moving through her 10th house, like the contested allegations of like her role, her ability to
Mm-hmm.
take that role, her right to that role.
Yeah.
But then the moon ultimately hits Jupiter. So it's like things do turn out in her favor, in my
Mm-hmm.
opinion, because of that.
Yeah. I don't like that the moon doesn't see fortune, but the moon also rules fortune. So it's almost like the things that are being done, like kind of make or break. I don't like that fortune is with Mars, which again is spelling to me the ways in which, like, the ongoing conflicts that her current administration is, funding, facilitating, whatever, possibly threatening, like, or creating these difficulties to deal with, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then I think the other part of Saturn, Moon squaring each other is maybe just that struggle to reach the parts of the base that, typically go for Democrats, because I feel like obviously the past few Democrats have like tried to like reach across the aisle, but I feel like she's really overdoing it right now. And it's putting her in a position where she could possibly alienate the standard Democratic base, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I could see that possibly being a potential issue that does come up as we, are in the closing phase of the election.
Yes. So speaking of which, this solar return chart will tell us about her whole year, but we can also look at this chart to tell us about her month. Um, and this month would encapsulate the election itself. So looking at that Mars conjunct a lot of fortune through that lens, that definitely spells contested. That definitely spells challenges. Mars having to fight for something, having to defend something in Cancer. We would also look at the energy of the month being Sagittarius, being something to be celebrated. We've seen that with Trump with his RNC month. He was definitely on a high that month with the Sag rising. So she has that here for this month with Venus there to boot. So
Hmm.
that would definitely be favorable for her. Um, Also, the moon's aspects could tell us a lot about things that happen in the month. So Saturn would be something that's disappointing, but then the aspect to Jupiter, it means that like ultimately things go her way here.
Yeah, I would have to agree. Like, it does look like, if not like something about maybe a contested result, it could be that, a typical part of the Democratic base abandoning the Democrats and that being the reason for said contested result, right? And then the application to Jupiter might involve some kind of resolution. The final aspect that the moon would make before changing signs would be that trine to the sun,
Fine.
which
Yeah.
does make me think that the courts may have to intervene in some cases, but I don't like that the sun is fallen. I don't like that it's being dog walked by a fallen Mars, where people are kind of running interference with the legal process. And the legal folks are in a position where they're trying to appease everybody, but like ultimately pissing off everyone, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's tricky too. It's unfortunate because trying to tease apart the elements of this chart that tell us about the year versus which parts tell us about the month in particular are a little difficult to tease apart. And yet, this is the one that we really need to look at.
yeah.
But we still have a couple more months to look at. I mean, this is the time too where Mercury, as her Time Lord, um, that square, well, actually, the Mars is kind of okay, Mars is heading into that square then. So
Hmm.
we would see that within this period. Actually, I think. Here, let's pull up the next one.
Yeah, November.
Hmm. Yeah. So this is the November one, but before we get there, Mars does square her Mercury. Um, and
Yeah,
Pluto, does Pluto get there too? No,
it
not quite.
not yet.
But yeah, I mean, that's an uncomfy. That's a lot of friction. That's antagonizing. Because again, Mars is in Leo there. So Mars is totally antagonizing her Time Lord there. So there's um yeah, a great deal of friction and stress to be dealt with there. It feels accusatory.
It does, but guess what? I kind of like November for her, right?
I do too.
So this would be after the election. Yet another Sag rising chart. So like again, this is giving me the impression that yes, there is some kind of like legal thing, but also like a partnership thing. And like literally in my notes, just because the ascendant is in the seventh, but falling in her return first, with the 12th part being in the 10th, I was like, this feels like taking over for a partner where she may get, and this is why now that I think about it, like this seems really out there. I know, but I was just looking at this chart and I was like, this looks like the potential for getting to take over from a partner early. The reason I say that is Mercury and Jupiter are opposing each other in this chart. Mercury rules that midheaven. Mercury is also in that last decan of Virgo, which does have a lot of those connotations of preparing for the afterlife or like transition, right? Um, I also feel like this might add on to the layers around some of the legal challenge that we're seeing and the accountability that people may be demanding of her, right, during this period.
Hmm.
Um, I really like that the moon is, sure, she's in the eighth, but she's also with fortune, ruling fortune.
Yes. Yeah.
And I believe she is not making any hard aspects to malefics.
Yeah, no.
So, yeah.
And you know, the moon rules her month. She's in a second house perfection month here. So
Mm,
that would bring in the importance of, I don't know, some of those incoming Mars retrograde themes, just because Mars was just there. So I don't know, there could be some kind of resonance with that, even though we don't see it in this chart
hmm.
and we won't see Mars come back here for a while, but that might still be important. But the moon rules this month. And so the 11th house of colleagues is really important. The people who are on her side, the people who are supporting her from the natal 11th house. But the lunations are going to be important here. And we're going to see a new moon on December 1st. This is going to happen at 9 degrees Sagittarius. And this is configured to that Jupiter Saturn square. So it's going to be around December that we see the second exact square. And we just are coming off of that here from the month of August. So we saw a lot of that again with Jupiter bringing in a lot of like misinformation, the misuse of media, and Saturn trying to crack down and rein it all in, but having trouble with that. So for her to be having like this nice moon here, moon in Cancer, moon close to fortune, like, yes, like favorable things are happening, but there's a lot of stress going on. We also see a Gemini full moon on December 15th. This is interesting because it conjoins her natal ascendant. And there's a square with Neptune. Remember, I talked about Neptune with Trump being like fame, popularity, um, and people being enamored with you. So that is interesting that we do see both of them enjoying um lunations. Like for Trump, it's his midheaven. For Harris, it's her ascendant at this time.
Yeah, I do find it interesting that in this chart as well, when you look at the moon's last aspect to a planet, it's the sun. This time
Yes.
the sun is not busted in Libra. Sure, it's in the 12th, but it's not trying to appease different sides and factions, right? So this does look like something more decisive coming
Yeah.
about, and I do think that it does like point more towards her being in that authoritative leadership role personally.
And the 12th part of the ascendant points to her natal 10th house.
Yeah,
So that's also favorable for her. So yeah, moon being ruler, making nice aspects, it's in the eighth, but yeah, so there's challenges to deal with, likely with the challenge to her win or people refusing to certify the results potentially. But ultimately, it does look favorable. And you know, that moon applying to the sun, we see that in every return chart. So that's
interesting.
very favorable for her.
Okay, let's look at December.
All right. All right. So December brings us to a third house month ruled by the sun. So the sun dealing with visibility. She does have a fallen sun in her chart, but um, not the end of the world for me. In this chart, the sun would be moving through her seventh house and
Hmm.
then moving into her eighth house. So I think that that might be important to note around like eighth house topics being important for the month. And we've seen
Hmm.
that show up a lot in her solar return chart too.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that like both the third and ninth are being activated. So maybe something around like courts and voting and rules around voting. That 12th part is in Cancer, which is her second. So like I do wonder if there's something legally that happens around, I don't know, campaign finances could have to do with
Yeah.
the counting of the votes. I don't think it's going to be something that really stops her from doing anything, considering that the moon is not quite enclosed, no, but it was just aspecting both benefics,
Yeah.
having
Wait,
long separated from Mars.
Mel, I'm sorry, I'm having like a light bulb moment. Wait, because I'm wondering about like the second house and how the second house could be like things that you have and like
Hmm.
playing chips basically. Could votes be a second house thing?
Could be.
I
Could
mean,
be.
I would say voters would be 11th house, but I don't know. Sorry to
Yeah.
cut you off. I was just like,
No, votes, delegates, things you possess,
mm-hmm.
maybe.
Hmm.
But wouldn't this also cover like the period when they would need to certify results as well? Like,
Yes, this would cover like January 6th. Yeah.
oh God, okay.
And look at the ascendant though. It's Vance's and Trump's ascendant degree natally,
Hmm.
which is weird. So it's like, I don't know. I think that that's significant potentially that their presence and their you know, it's basically a battle is going to be really important there, like the role of her opponents here. So that's another indication.
Yeah, I do like that the moon is translating between Venus and the sun. So it looks like, okay, there's some contention between who's really winning. And I could see Venus in the seventh being like, okay, they didn't really win because XYZ, right? And the moon kind of being like the active process of disputing that, but then the moon giving both of them a relationship, pointing to, I mean, Venus is applying to the sun anyway, right? By sextile. So that kind of also going on, making me think, okay, ultimately they will have to like, I don't want to say like rule in her favor, but like it seems more favorable to her because Saturn and Venus do not connect, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, the interesting thing, another interesting thing that stood out to me is Uranus on the midheaven. So for those of you who use the outer planets, I mean, isn't this around the time that Trump is having that lunation conjunct Uranus
Yes.
on his midheaven? It's like right around there.
I
I
think that
think
might be the month before.
it is, but let's say the aftermath of it, because I think that
Hmm.
that would have been maybe December, like the December 1st lunation, or no,
No, that would have been
no,
the
that would be a Taurus one. So that
yeah,
would be, yeah, okay. So that would be the November one still.
but that would be in similar degrees though.
Yeah, totally. Well, that can still indicate, let's say for our purposes here, something disruptive, something unpredictable, something really stressful characterizing the month. And then also with Saturn ruling fortune, that's going to be some sort of difficulty that she encounters in the month as well. But I do like, I mean, the moon is co-present with Mars. So it's like there's an awareness of something that's causing a lot of rage that's happening.
Mm,
There's like a fight that there's an awareness of it, but it's not like the moon is running into it. I mean, the moon is also averse to Saturn. The moon, I mean, if you're looking at just traditional aspects, it's just moving into the sun. So that
yep.
seems favorable for a rise for her as well.
Hmm.
All right. Well, let's look at,
January.
yeah, let's do it.
Okay, January.
So this would cover the inauguration. So this month would be super important to look at. Um, so we're in a fourth house perfection month. So were she to move into the White House, let's say, that would align with being in a fourth house perfection month ruled by Mercury.
Yes, and I'm just looking at what I have in my notes here. It's funny because we get like the opposite version where trying to think. The return third is active, but the natal ninth, 12, like again, the 12th part in the second, more stuff with vote counts and things, right?
I know. Why does that second house keep showing up? And that's why I'm wondering if it's like a vote count thing.
That being said, it's interesting because this is another chart that has the enemies of the moon configuration. She has that again in February as well, right?
Hmm.
So it's just like, it's just giving again, being accused of doing certain things like taking votes, this, that, and the third, even if that's not necessarily true. I do
Yeah.
like that the moon is with fortune, right? So there is
Yes.
more influence or sway that she has
We keep seeing that.
on things. Yeah.
We saw that in, wait, we saw that in her November month. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. But what I actually like about the moon is that even though it's technically enemies of the moon, like if you look at the degrees, the moon is actually enclosed by the benefics. Because she will hit
Wow.
Venus first before
You're
she gets
right.
to Saturn.
You're right. Wow.
So,
Yeah. Well, that I was trying to figure this one out because yeah, like ultimately the moon is applying to Venus. So if we're looking at like what happens first, then that would be something that would be objectively positive. But then the moon runs into Saturn. So it's like the way I interpreted that was okay, like there's a celebratory moment on January 20th, and then you got to get back to work. And that's kind of what I was saying at the beginning of our delineation of Harris was that it's that Venus Saturn story. It's the Venus meets up with Saturn. There's some relief from all of the fight that you've been putting to get to this point in your career. And then, but then it's back to work and it's having to answer to the people and to the world and everything like that. And everything that you've been saying about people putting pressure on her to answer to certain things. Um, so yeah.
yeah, I think for the fact that Saturn, okay, so it's funny because this is also around the halfway point of the Mars retrograde, and Mars is now, well, the sun has separated from Mars, right?
So it is halfway. Yeah.
And Mars and Saturn are now mutually applying, which to me feels like maybe taking the helm. I think doubling down
Mhm.
on that, the fact that the moon will translate, it'll connect from Jupiter to Venus and then go to Saturn. I do wonder if, again, there's still some stuff with the courts that has to be resolved around who's really the winner. Because again, the courts will be involved, but I think that the outcome is a lot more positive given that, I mean, the sun is not seeing Jupiter like at all, who rules the midheaven, is separating from, Mars, who rules the 10th. Saturn has some kind of configuration to both of those things by whole sign and degree based aspect, right?
Mhm.
So, it just feels like maybe certain things needing to get settled in court, maybe. And again, going back to the unglamorous job of being in charge of the presidency, I do think that given that there is an enemies of the moon configuration, people may also, again, be mad at policies she's inheriting from predecessor.
Mhm.
So I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Trump's inauguration month looks a little bit more favorable, I would say, but I think Harris's looks more favorable for the election. But even still, here in her chart, she also has the lot of fortune in Mercury, in a Mercury ruled sign. So there's something about like speeches being really important at this time. And ultimately, she does keep getting like the moon applying to the sun. So I think that that's really favorable in terms of visibility, taking the helm, um, being recognized as the president. And yeah, but otherwise, this chart itself isn't like as loud as I think her transits are on this day for me.
Yeah.
But the moon is interesting though, for sure.
Yeah. So part of me wonders if the reason that the inauguration chart is not hitting is because she may get sworn in earlier. Like I'm looking at November for that. I don't know
Oh,
why. Like,
well, yeah, I mean, a lot of people are suggesting that eclipse, okay, namely Chris Brennan. Chris Brennan has been saying that eclipse could absolutely elevate her sooner. It's possible, but I also think that eclipse, because eclipses are sensitive for a while, that doesn't have to happen for that eclipse to still say that she gets elevated. But that certainly could happen. I was wondering too, like I did a little bit of research on like could that inauguration date change? Like if everything's contested, I wanted to see like what are we looking at here in terms of the election being contested? Like how drawn out could this be? And from what I understand, they keep that date the same no matter what. Like a decision will be made. So unless And like I don't know, like I think that they've just always done that date. Like they just make it so. So I don't
Mm-hmm.
know. Like it would have to be something pretty freaking crazy to make a concession for that date to change. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. So
So
my,
ultimately,
I don't know. Like my pet theory is there's a window of opportunity for her to like take the helm in November.
okay. Yeah, tell us more.
Um, I would need to actually look at what's going on with Joe again. Unsure, unclear, but there's something there. And then I looked at February for her and it looks a lot more celebratory, right? Um,
November?
yeah. No, February.
Oh,
I
February.
looked, I peeked. I was like, looks a little celebratory. Trump's not so much.
Yeah.
Looks like more legal stuff, having former employees turn on you.
Mm-hmm.
Hers looks more like, okay, putting some difficulty behind me, but still having to deal with the fallout, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's what I was thinking about Venus retrograde in her 10th house and how that would be a moment of having to like redefine her policy versus her predecessor because
Mm-hmm.
Venus is all about like what's important to me and like she just has to get there and then she can do things more her way. I think she's really trying to stay loyal to Joe Biden because of what he did, in order to allow her to have this opportunity. Um, so I think she's really trying to be respectful to that for the sake of the party as well. But that
Mm-hmm.
Venus retrograde will be really important for her to redefine like her own positions on things and her own strategies and everything like that. So yeah, I mean, ultimately, we may have to come back and do this again to
Oh
look
yeah.
outward. But I think for tonight, we've covered a lot of terrain. We're coming in at like 3 hours recording here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, I think you and I both agree on a lot of things, namely that Harris will win, the election will be contested. The one thing I'm still formulating in my mind, with Neptune coming into Aries, Uranus coming into Gemini, like there's absolutely going to be the potential for a more direct involvement in international conflict, but also civil conflict. Like I really think that the Pluto return isn't over. To your point about Pluto and Aquarius, like I really think that we're going to see division create even more um of a problem. And I think that Neptune and Aries is going to be about that. And even if like Trump doesn't have to win the presidency to influence politics,
Nope.
and he doesn't have to win the presidency to continue to lead um, an ideology in this country.
Exactly.
And so we don't have to have a civil war like we had last time, where we're literally fighting in trenches at each other. I don't think actually we were doing trenches at that time. Anyways, like we don't have to have like physical warfare, but it can be more ideological. And again, like we're in Pluto and Aquarius. So warfare is going to look a lot different. Warfare can happen by buying the favor of someone like Elon Musk to sway people to your side and to get more money in your pocket. So I think we're going to see more um, of that type of thing, unfortunately, with Neptune and Aries. I think Neptune and Aries, I mean, it's an idealization of war and um, even like I've seen like eras of Neptune and Aries becoming like inspired by military uniforms too. Like we've seen that, like the modern day like suit and everything like that, like the little things that go on top of the shirt.
Hmm.
You still see them on dress shirts. That is a military embellishment. And so yeah, I'm curious to see what that ultimately looks like. But I think Trump is not going anywhere. I just don't think he's going to
Uh-uh.
win.
Yeah, no, and I keep telling people, you can't get complacent about these kinds of things because the Project 2025 initiative is not just going to go away if, the Democrats win again, right? But
No,
I also want people to think about things a little differently because sure, maybe people kind of cool off of Trump, right? I don't know, but even just watching certain parts of Kamala's acceptance speech, it was very much a lot of the things you described. Glorification of the military and conflict, right? And something that I've been thinking about increasingly as someone who has vaguely left-leaning politics, right, is how a lot of things that were once meaningful movements to enfranchise people who are struggling is like figuring out how to absorb these people into the larger structures that are used to harm other people, right?
yeah,
So the co-optation of, you know, racial and gender equality, like, okay, you all can have a seat at the table as long as you're willing to look away from the crimes that we perpetuate against humanity elsewhere for your benefit. I
yeah.
could see that happening as well, and I think Kamala would be like the perfect agent of such a thing, right?
Hmm.
So I know that yes, Trump could be there influencing politics. I think that's very much in the realm of possibility, but I encourage people to think about how their own ideologies, which may be anti-Trump, can also be co-opted for similar harms, right? So, food for thought.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and like Saturn conjunct Neptune, I mean, there's a lot to be said about that too. Like with Project 2025 and trying to establish this ideal utopia vision of what certain people want the world to look like. Like Saturn is going to like try to make that happen. And granted, Saturn isn't super effective in Aries, but um yeah, to your point too about Kamala Harris and like the energy behind her right now that she has. I mean, ultimately, like she's a prosecutor. And a lot of people are like, yeah, like vote for the prosecutor, not the felon. But a lot of left-leaning people wouldn't normally like get on board with that, which is kind of a Neptune and Aries thing of like romanticizing the like cop, basically.
Yeah, I mean, just you wait for K2 in Leo and Rahu in Aquarius. It's just giving glorifying the usurper, hating like the typical ruler without realizing that said person will just become a different version of a status quo. I don't know.
Yeah.
But like that's kind of where we're heading. And I believe that Mars during that time will be retrograde in Virgo Leo while that's happening. And Jupiter will also be in Leo.
Oh my.
Yeah, that's like the return of my natal Mars placement because I was born on the other side of that Mars retrograde in the 90s. Like,
Oh.
so that'll be interesting to see.
So you were born right after a Mars station?
After Mars like cleared its shadow, if you will,
Okay,
right?
okay. So
Yeah.
you had your Mars return early.
Hmm.
Anyway, that's what we call astrological doom scrolling, people. When you're looking really far ahead and you're like, what's gonna happen? So there you have it. Those are our predictions for the election and its outcome. We will have to, I imagine we'll have to touch base after the election, to kind of sort through all the other influences that are coming in. Maybe we'll have a chance to take a look at all this Aries action because you even mentioned Mercury retrograde in Aries. Like, oh my gosh, so much is happening in Aries and
Yeah.
Pisces. Um, so yeah, there's our official prediction. You can read more about our predictions in detail and connect with us in other places too. So, Mo, where can we find your work? And
Currently on Twitter.
how can we get readings with you?
Yes, I am open for bookings. I should have like a link to my Acuity on most things, mainly on Twitter, hoping to revive my Substack. I've just been overwhelmed with other things in life right now. Um, yeah, so I hope to see you guys on the sinking ship that is Twitter.
Oh my God. I know. I only go on there for you and like a handful of other people. I don't have the headspace for what was formerly Twitter anymore. I just can't deal. Um,
No.
yeah. Well, Mo, thank you so much for joining us here today. It's been a joy and a pleasure connecting with you on these techniques because I'm trying to learn them too. And yeah, hopefully, like I said, we'll have the chance to do this again. Um, I'm Catherine Urban. If you're finding me here for the first time, you can connect with me at catherineurban.com for sessions. And that's where I just like post everything that I have going on, events, classes. I'm a mom, so I'm really bad at promoting myself on social media. So that's the best way to stay up to date with me with what I'm offering. But I am on social media sharing a lot about forecasts, astrology, and my children. So you can't come just for this astrology, unfortunately. You have to deal with cute pictures of my kids too. But you can find me at Astro Catherine if I didn't say that. All right. Well, to be continued, I guess. Right?
Yeah, and remember, people, if you feel so inclined, go register and vote.
Yes, that is what we will leave you with. Check your voting status and make sure that even though what we said about who we think will win, whether you resonate with that or not, don't let it just be like, oh, well, it's all decided. Like, this is close enough as we saw through our charts that you do have to participate in this one. Like it could go, it's very close. Like it feels like this is a moment that could tip our future in one direction or another. So definitely go vote.
Yeah. Okay, take care, everyone.
All right. Bye.